Welcome to Napino Knowledge Series number 10, the evolving landscape of connected medical devices. My name is Nasser Lukmani, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I would like to thank our sponsor, Napino, for hosting this webinar, including Ms. Sakshi Nagpal and her incredible team at Napino for all their help. If you have any questions during the webinar, please send them through the chat function, and we will try to address as many as we can at the end. This webinar will be recorded, and a link will be posted on social media, including Napino's website, www.napinotech.com. That is NAPINOTECH.com, and their YouTube channel. Please subscribe to them so that you're informed when that happens. You may also email Napino on info@napinotech.com and follow them on LinkedIn and YouTube to be notified of future such events. I'm requesting that the panelists please keep their microphones muted unless they are speaking. I'm also requesting that responses be brief so that we may cover as many questions from the audience as we can. We have a distinguished panel of entrepreneurs who are immersed in Internet of Medical Things. Let's begin with each panelist taking 3 minutes to introduce themselves and their company. Mr. Matt Meir, please tell us about yourself and about Helios Medical.
Yeah, thank you, Nasser. So I've been involved in the world of medical devices for about 15 years and developing new technologies for over 20 years. The company, I founded a medical device company, I founded medical service companies, and the current company we are involved in is with remote patient monitoring and remote therapeutic monitoring, which is taking data from patients who are remote and out of the hospital and making that available to providers so that they can provide better care. We see a lot of innovation and evolvement in the world of medical device. And it's nice to see how things are changing and being more proactive to customers and patients' needs.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. David Halleck, please give us your background and a bit about HWI.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Nasser. So my name is David Halleck. I'm the VP of Electrical Engineering here at HWI. I've been in industry for about 27 years. Started off at Ball Aerospace in the highly regulated, doing RF design for them. Went into medical after that with contract manufacturing, contract design. So I've been in that arena for quite a few years with Peak Industries, Delphi Medical, Spartan. I also worked at Plexus and the Design Center in Louisville, Colorado. On the OEM side, I have worked on at Bard Medical on medical devices, getting them to market, working with the clinician side of it. So that was a lot of good experience. Most recently, within the last 5 years, I came back to really the family company that's been going for about 37 years called HWI. And what we do is contract development, so really focusing on medical devices. I'll get into how the landscape has changed over the years later, but really our focus is on the hardware, the firmware, the electrical, the software, and really getting product to market, getting it through the regulatory systems. Just recently was acquired by a company called SteriPack. So what that allows us to do is offer more value to our customers, on the contract manufacturing side, on the engineering with the mechanical, industrial design, and really being a full kind of service provider for our customers in that arena.
Thank you, David. Mr. John Sage, please tell us about yourself and Vergent products.
Sure. Thanks, Nasser. Good morning. My name's John Sage. I'm with a company, Vergent Products. We are an electronics contract design and manufacturing company in Colorado. We are ISO 13485 certified for helping our clients with medical device design and manufacturing. I've been in this company for about 4 years. My background, I've got about 30 years in industry, started my career in plastics, and I've been through a series of materials industries like fiberglass, plastics, did some strategy consulting, and did a stint in pharmaceutical data management where we were capturing patient data on respiratory clinical trials. So my experience goes across materials, some clinical trials background, and now I'm in the electronics industry for the last 4 years.
Thank you, John. Mr. Vinay Solanki, please give us your background and a bit about Napino.
Yeah, hi, sure. First of all, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity, Nasser, and I think hearing from the panelists. Quickly about myself, I have approximately 18 years experience in the industry now, primarily working in IoT for last 8 years across different companies, at Telco and then at Lenovo, and then currently at Napino. I think quickly about Napino as a company, we are also very similar to Vergent. We have been in existence for 30 years now as an ODM, where we operate in electronic design and manufacturing services for different customers across the globe. We work in automotive, we work in consumer electronics, and we work in other areas like LED lighting, instrument clusters, and IoT. Particularly the area that I'm representing today, Napino Digital Solutions. It's an initiative started by Napino around 2 years back, approximately, where our focus is to offer our services to build and to support our customers in the area of IoT device designing and manufacturing, both at prototype scale or sample scale or at mass scale. Like as Napino, we have around 5,000 employees spread across 9 factories in India. And we basically, I think, one of the very well established player in this domain with multiple ISO certification. In fact, what John covered, we are also getting certified for 13485 very soon, as early as next month, because we have some work coming our way in the medical domain. So I think from the topic of this event, as Napino and as NDS, there is a very strong focus to work with our customers in the wearable devices, particularly focused on healthcare and preventive healthcare mechanism. So that's about us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinay. We have prepared a series of questions for each panelist to generate an interesting discussion. But I do request that if any of the other panelists want to jump in, please do so. To set the stage, healthcare systems are being forced to adapt due to global events such as COVID-19. Such events have accelerated the adoption of telemedicine, remote monitoring, self-diagnostics, and connectivity, therefore forcing technology to keep pace with the needs. Of specific importance is availability of patient information while maintaining confidentiality to deliver timely and efficient healthcare services. As the technology is rapidly transforming to fill that need, India continues to emerge as the preferred manufacturing hub for medical products. My first question is for Mr. Matt Mayer. Helios Medical is at the forefront, engaging directly with medical professionals, service providers, and patients. In your opinion, how has IoT transformed medical devices, and how important is availability and handling of patient information when delivering healthcare services?
Yeah, thanks, Nasser. So to answer your first question, I really see that there's 4 ways that IoT is transforming medical devices. And I think first is where care is delivered. So healthcare has been moving out of the hospital and into the home now for a little while, but there were really 3 catalyzing elements that sparked it and have accelerated that process. The first the remote patient monitoring coming out, IoT, and then COVID. And of course, COVID was the tipping point, as we all know, that forced providers to be able to offer care outside of the office, right? So they were forced to do so. And now we have virtual practices springing up because of the acceptance and the adoption of that. And we're seeing that in all kinds of specialties, whether it's primary care, whether it's psychiatry, you name it. But there's really been a progression of the ability to deliver care virtually. And I think that that's, that trend in and of itself is moving things that direction. And both providers and patients have really accepted this. And so I think that while there was a hesitation there, certainly the COVID forced that issue. In addition, telemed tech and digital technology and RPM also made it possible to make this shift happen from the hospital to the home. And that was because now people can get paid for it. And particularly your device can get reimbursed for this. So without having the ability to be paid, you wouldn't have seen this shift. But now that it is there, you are seeing it. And then lastly, the IoT, the Internet of Things, has really facilitated this technologically speaking, so that we can capture physiologic data remotely in real time or not, but capture it remotely and in a cost-effective manner, which we weren't able to do before. So that's really the first big trend of where care is going. And IoT has facilitated that process. I think the second is also data and analytics. So the amount of data that we're collecting, this has never been possible before. And so what that really does is encourages more value-based medicine in the way we're looking at things. So, if you think about how value-based medicine is structured, you need to understand how treatment protocols are impacting patients, how they're impacting their outcomes, and how they're impacting cost. IoT makes that process significantly easier and less expensive. So now that when we put a protocol in place, we can look and see what that impact is. We can make rapid changes around it, which we weren't able to do before, really. And then, rather than picking, up a few measurements, which is what we did in the past, where someone showed up at the clinic for maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, and we measure their blood pressure and their weight. Now we can do it on a daily basis. That like I said, we couldn't do this before. And so really, this has allowed us to get much, much more data in that area. We can identify those problems quicker. We can make faster care decisions, and we can get fewer complications, all of which is lowering costs, and all of which is and as we move to more value-based care, I think it's really going to impact the way care is delivered. And so if you can't do that, if you don't have the ability to do that, I think you're really missing out. Third, really turning common home items into medical devices. It's fascinating to see. So whether it's watches or phones, as we all are familiar with, but baby beds, chairs, all of these items that we have typically in your home, now that care has moved this direction, are all being structured so that they can be used as medical devices, right? So whether you're lying in bed and it's tracking your respiration, it's tracking your heart, it's tracking your even your blood pressure, believe it or not. It's amazing to see where the innovations are going, but it's that switch now to turning those common items in the house into medical devices, and we're seeing that a lot. And in my business, in fact, we talk to people at least once a month, a new innovative company that's doing something to be able to move those sensors into the home and to make them effective. And then lastly, I think lastly, and the second part of your question was regarding the availability and I think and handling of patient information. So regulatory wise, the data has to be secure, right? And we know that. And so it's so important that data is secure and that it's HIPAA compliant. And then the data also has to be accessible to care providers in a usable format. A lot of what's been going on is that you're able to get data, and before it was structured in a way that it was with, like I said, within a hospital or within the clinic, and the security issues weren't there. But today, because things are distributed and care can be delivered at work, it can be delivered at home, it can be delivered on the road, it can be all of these places, securing that data is absolutely critical. And this also means, though, that data has to be accessible within the EHR. So one of the things that I think a lot of companies struggle with, or devices do, is they make data available, but then you have to log on to a portal, you have to log on somewhere in order to capture that data. What we're finding is that that's just not acceptable. As a provider, if you have to log on to 5, 6, 7 different portals, you just won't do it. And so the adoption levels really decrease significantly. So being able to make that data accessible and easy to use for the provider means integrating it into their EHR in some way, generally speaking. And so that has to be part of the overall solution. I mean, there's many software companies out there that can bridge that gap. So we're seeing software move into that direction to facilitate that process with those devices. But there are, if you have a proprietary device that you've innovated and developed, you really got to consider that as part of this, developing a software solution on your own that's going to allow that integration to happen. And given the number of EHR devices that are there, it can be quite challenging.
Thank you, Matt. My next question is for Mr. David Halleck. You develop products for customers like Matt. One of your challenges is to deliver easy-to-use medical devices requiring robust and secure software. How have these needs influenced your development process, and what steps have you taken to ensure data security while maintaining accessibility?
Yeah, Nasser. So I think one of the things that the need has definitely evolved over the years. Like Matt said, but from what I've seen, it's really gone on the medical side from a razor blade model, right? It used to be a piece of capital equipment, an infusion pump or an oxygen concentrator, and that would work with the razor blade portion of it, a tubing set or some disposable. What I've seen now is it's razor blade app. Everything, like Matt said, everything's talking to the cloud now. And there's like you said, there's a couple reasons. There's the telemedicine portion of it, which we've been talking about for 20 years now, and trying to get that. And I think there's been some key pieces that have been driving that recently. And then there's the data mining portion of it on the back end. And so people want to analyze the data. People want to mine this data, be it big data or small data. There's definitely a need that's there now. And of course, what that enables and what required to have safety and efficacy of not only your device, but your communication chain is cybersecurity. So that's really transformed ours, just from capital equipment and consumable to really identifying and attacking the full stack IoT. And it's not just software, right? It's all the way from the front end on the hardware side to the user interface. If we're looking at implementing a Bluetooth solution or a Wi-Fi solution or a combination or a proprietary on the front end through the user interface, we've really have to now dive into the human factors engineering of it, the user interface, the experience behind that, where it used to be just maybe an LED or a push button that took care of it. Everything is now going the touch panel, Apple-esque type interface, right? And my kids don't even know what it means to not have a touch screen anymore, right? Yep. And so that's really driving the interface. And as SteriPack, we now have our sister company, that HSD, that can drive that human factors engineering, that user interface, and really offer value for our customers internally and as one company that we couldn't before to get a full value solution. But getting to the security aspect of it, yeah, it's evolving, and what I see is it's an onion, right? There's multiple layers of security that need to be implemented, and it can start off with one layer, but as we're evolving, and as the requirements and as the needs get to remote patients and remote clinicians, we need other forms of cybersecurity. And what we do is implement a vulnerability index into our system and into our process. And so what we're looking for within, and it's not just HIPAA, right? I mean, obviously patient data needs to be secure, but it's the rest of the data as well. It's the access, it's the accessibility. So we put in an 8-step system to really drive cybersecurity and enable that that protection. One is the secure communications, obviously encryption. I mean, if you don't encrypt, everybody used to have an RS-232 port coming out of the back of their device, and anybody with a dumb terminal could plug into it. I mean, that's years ago, right? But encryption on the cyber or the secure communication is a key piece. The data protection, so having a transport layer security, encrypted storage, these are all layers of the onion that we're enabling to be able to ensure security for our customers. Device integrity, ensuring that somebody can't backdoor into it, securing, ensuring that the data integrity with CRC checks are enabled. That's another piece of the onion that we enable. User authentication, Matt talked about the touch points. You can't have 7 different touch points and 3 different logins, but there still is hospital if we're going through an HIS or HL7 type system. There's we still need to enable and get those doors enabled. Software maintenance, so over the air firmware updates, the continuous improvement process. Even physical access, right, has changed. And as we're going, as we're taking the razor and razor blade and combining it into one for like a smart device, that this is very important to be able to ensure that the devices aren't tamper-proof, they have authentication, ensuring reliability, again, reliability and availability through the hospital systems. But like Matt said, physicians aren't just in the hospitals anymore. The patients aren't just in the hospitals anymore. So we need to ensure that we have reliability and availability, not just through the HIS, but through the cloud as well. And then as a backbone, and this is like the FDA and 1345 and just the ISO in general, right? It's documentation and understanding upfront what we're designing, what the requirements are, understanding the hazard analysis, the traceability matrix, really driving understanding on what the need there is and what the requirements are is key in that process as well.
Thank you, David. My next question is for Mr. John Sage. Vergent Products builds verification prototypes and short runs of products David Halleck engineers for Matt Mayer. You have to ensure that components and suppliers you use are globally available to minimize disruptions down the road. What supply chain challenges is Vergent Products facing compared to, say, 5 years ago? And what are your predictions on how the supply chain will evolve in the next 5 years?
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Nasser. I have to say 5 years seems like an eternity right now, based upon the state of the supply chain. There are many challenges in the current environment that go across many different material categories like sheet metal, wire, cables, plastics, but specifically in electronic components that go into printed circuit board assembly. And that's where we spend the bulk of our time here at Vergent in contract manufacturing. There are a few key challenges I wanted to highlight here. We are in a perfect storm scenario. Demand and supply are out of sync. Demand is very strong, and it's due to the things we've been talking about so far on this call: connected devices, IoT explosion, MedTech adopting telehealth and remote monitoring. All those connected devices across all industries are driving demand. And at the same time, we're wrestling with the pandemic effects of labor shortages, global supply chains decreasing and shifting. And it's really created an unprecedented supply constraint for part availability and long lead times to be able to get components. But the first major challenge I wanted to talk about is one we're all familiar with. It's the shortage and long lead times on semiconductors. We're seeing lead times now It's not uncommon to see a 52-week lead time or longer. So from the time we place the order, the distribution partner or the manufacturer can commit to 52 weeks or possibly longer. We even have some semiconductors, we try and get a lead time, and manufacturers don't even quote a lead time right now. We just got a recent announcement from one of the chip manufacturers, ST Micro. They said they're going on allocation and they're recommending that we get orders placed for 2024. So that's kind of the state of the semiconductor supply chain at the moment. The launch of 5G, automotive adoption, all the different industries that are adopting IoT technologies are really driving demand. There is new investment happening in silicon wafer fabs to be able to increase capacity, but it's lagging behind current demand. And it takes time for new fabs to come online and be able to get the volume. The other dynamic that's happening in the chip market, because of limited capacity, chip manufacturers are allocating some of their capacity to higher end, more value-added chips. That's causing shortages in some of the more discrete, lower end components like diodes and transistors. So those components are now becoming long lead time because capacity is shifting away from them. There have also been unfortunate force majeure situations that idled semiconductor capacity. The ice storms in Texas took down Texas Instruments capacity. A fire in Japan took down a Renesas chip factory. So those types of confounding effects are exasperating supply. In the US, there is new semiconductor fab investment happening. Intel, TSMC, Samsung, they've all announced that they're adding capacity, but again, that takes time. So our recommendation for new products is design, select your IC, select your semiconductor, design the rest of your electronics around that, and place orders. Get orders in place to be able to get those semiconductors flowing and get in the supply chain. So that's kind of the current state of semiconductors. The second challenge is really the current design of supply chains. They were built for market conditions where supply and demand were in balance. So now we're in this market condition where demand is outstripping supply, and supply chains are just not built for it. I read an interesting article a couple of weeks ago. You know, the whole industries, all industries adjusted to just-in-time JIT supply chains, and now it's just in case. It's JIC. So there's brute force happening in the supply chain now. We're pre-buying components. We have clients at Vergent that are asking us to go buy their components into 2024 and buy those components, get in the supply chain, and that's tying up working capital for companies. Then we're not going to recoup that working capital in the way of product revenue for a year or longer. Alternate components are causing a lot of extra rework in the supply chain. A quick example, at time of quote, we quoted an integrated circuit at $8 a piece on a printed circuit board through standard distribution. At the time we got the order, we went to buy that semiconductor part. It wasn't available through standard distribution, but you could buy it through a broker and pay $47 for an $8 part. We went back to our client and said, do you approve $47 for this part? They did. By the time we got back to place the order, that part had now gone up to $103 per part. So we're working alternates, we're working approvals, we're touching orders 4 and 5 times, and we've had to hire extra buyers, extra quote engineers to be able to manage this chaos in the supply chain. One tool that's very helpful is using artificial intelligence tools that will look 7 years forward at components, and they'll tell you components that are not recommended for new design, they're becoming obsolete. And so we do that supply chain risk analysis with our clients during the design phase to point out any particular components that are going to be hard to get into the future. So especially in MedTech devices where changing components is not easy once they're spec'd in, it's really important to use tools like this to be able to look forward and select the right components. And it's not just semiconductors, secondary components, capacitors, resistors, power supplies are very hard to get right now. Fans, switches, relays, all of these things are very difficult to find in the supply chain, and lead times are getting extended. The war, in Ukraine and Russia is making precious metal mining access in Russia and Eastern Europe difficult. So those upstream raw materials that go into those components are getting hard to get. And the last challenge I just want to touch on quickly, and it's one that nobody likes to talk about. It's kind of the dark side of the industry, but counterfeit parts are on the rise. In a market like this, I forget the movie, the old line that says follow the money, but when parts are hard to get, counterfeits come into the market, and it's happening at an alarming rate. So make sure you're looking at counterfeit mitigation risk steps, and your supply chain partners have those steps in place, because brokers, I don't want to take a hard line against brokers. Brokers are serving the market right now. They're finding hard to find components, and there's some very good and reputable brokers out there, but you have to vet the brokers and make sure you're not working with a broker you just haven't heard of before that says they can go find that part. There's a chance it could be a counterfeit part. So those are kind of three big challenges in the electronics market. Prediction for the next 5 years, Nasser, the prevailing thinking is we're going to be in this supply chain situation for the next 2 years, probably 3. As I mentioned, chip fabs take 2 to 3 years to ramp up to capacity. So 2025 is kind of the year that the industry believes is going to be a recovery year. And supply chains have kind of retrenched and localized during this time. But I think as we get outside that 3-year window, we'll start to see that begin to open back up and return to more normalcy.
Thank you so much, John. My next question is for Mr. Vinay Solanki. Napino is a full-service supplier from concept to high-volume production, including product testing and certification. You offer high-quality, low-cost overseas manufacturing, which is critical with higher production volumes. With the rise in demand for healthcare at home, the medical device market is expanding exponentially. What changes are you seeing in global supply of raw material and components? And how is Napino addressing these challenges to minimize customer disruptions?
Sure, thanks, Nasser. I think this is a great question, and it kind of follows on nicely to what John just covered, and I think he covered it very well, at least from the perspective of the 3 major risks that he covered. But before that, I think let me state few points about, I think, before coming to the supply chain challenge, which is very, I think, a common phenomena right now. When you look at IoT as a technology, I think that is one of the premise that we need to look at as a solution service provider, right? All 4 of us on the call is, when you look at any other industry, think of automotive, for example. There is a very stabilized design process. You make a product in automotive and it basically runs for 6 to 7 to 8 years in a particular car or a 2-wheeler, right? Because the standardization has been achieved over the past couple of decades, and the expectation of volume and the expectation of variability in the design is lower comparatively. Now, when you come to IoT or IoT in medical devices or IoT in general, one of the behavior or the scenario here is that IoT devices from one device to another, there is a lot of variability in terms of the requirement from the customer, in terms of what IC you can use to achieve the same thing, right? John put it nicely that when you think of any design today of IoT device or a hardware, there are multiple options possible. What you need to do is you need to look at the option that is going to help you to achieve the timeline and the price and the cost that you have promised to the customer. And if you don't do that, if you don't have a plan B ready, you'll end up in a situation where the price will start changing rapidly, and you might start like jumping from one approval to another, or one broker or distributor or stockist to another, right? Um, the inherent risk with IoT as a technology right now is that it is not standardized yet across the industry. If I look at an asset tracker versus a connected blood pressure monitor or a wearable watch that monitors my SpO2, I think every watch might have a different design or a different component inside it. Like maybe they might have some commonality. Like for example, to achieve Bluetooth connectivity, maybe there are 2 or 3 service providers out there. Nordic is there, Dialog is there, and maybe other service provider or OEMs, right, that can offer the chipset to you. So, but what is happening is that the need of the customer in different market at different volume demands that a manufacturer like us come out with a solution where we can service the different customer needs, right? Because one customer might be ready to pay $100 for a smart wearable, and there might be another customer in a different market, like let's say maybe a price competitive market or sensitive market, might be looking to go to the market with $40, $50 product with probably similar features. So one area that at Napino that we are trying to do and do it very well and in advance of time is whenever we hear a need from a customer, upfront we try to first is set the expectation that if you need to achieve a design at a particular timeline and price point, then ideally going with this kind of a solution is going to be better, because at least from the market and from our suppliers, we have a visibility of some certain type of ICs or raw material being available, right? But to add the point, I think maybe even David mentioned this, and to a certain way, John, that making a hardware is not just electronics, right? There is a lot of other components that come into play, from mechanical enclosure to wiring harness, to metal connectors, batteries, and so on. And today, I think, unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges, it is not just the ICs which are short supply. It is also all these other components that make up a product are actually facing shortages. Like we have seen one of the bigger shortage are in batteries nowadays, right? When we go and try to source, whether it is a lithium ion or a lithium polymer or even an alkaline, there are certain challenges that is happening especially when we ask for a larger volume from our suppliers. So to answer your first question, right, at Napino, I think that which you put up, that we do more than just being an EMS, right? We try to work with the customer, maybe even starting at ideation stage, all the way to a mass production stage. And I think that is where it gives us certain advantage, that when you start early with any customer, you are able to give certain inputs based on your experience in the market and in the industry, right? So if I give you one example, like today at Napino, we work with all the OEMs, and we source millions of units from them, both in terms of number of units and the value, the dollar value. But still, I think many of them have come back and they told us that you either are under allocation right now, or you need to plan 2 years to 3 years ahead to put an order if you really want to get the component at a particular price that you are expecting to deliver to your customer. So one area that we are trying to manage, and this is the risk that even John mentioned, right, is how well can you plan ahead of time? Can you convince your customer to buy certain long lead time components in bulk? And the challenge that we are facing, I would say, with some customers is that it's very hard to explain the customer the same scenario that we are facing as a service provider, right? Some customers are well educated, they understand the industry, they understand the challenges, and they are ready to basically put up the advance to buy the bulk quantity upfront. And there are few customers who may not be able to understand what is going on, and sometimes they are their target price and their target lead time have to be met irrespective. And that is where there are alternative plans that we do. Like if we can't go to an OEM or to a super distributor, then there are other kind of channels that we explore. One is of course going to a stockist, or sometimes they're called as broker. Another is doing online buying, or at time working with the customer to adjust the volume in a lot that can be deliverable. For example, I have a customer who wants 150,000 units to be manufactured in the entire 12 months. They had expectation to deliver 15,000 units per month approximately. But with the current challenges, I think at least we were able to come to a conclusion that maybe in the initial 3 to 6 months, there will be lower volume that we have to go to the market with. And maybe we can ramp up after 6 months or so. Because I think even John mentioned this, the approximate lead time is between 26 weeks to 52 weeks for most of the company. At least the one that matters, that basically make the product work, right? Because when you go to passive components, Nasser, there are alternatives you can come up with. Maybe you can find an alternative capacitor or a transistor, or maybe an alternative battery option for alternative power management in the product. Or at times, maybe the enclosure could be changed. Maybe there is an option to look at the IP rating differently if possible. But what you cannot find easily as an alternative are these critical ICs, microcontrollers, MCUs, or even sensors, for example. So that is where Napino, what we are trying to do is we're trying to look at the common demand coming from the industry, especially in the medical devices, and then to see where whatever common components are there, can we do either pre-buying, of course, with the advance coming from the customer, or to a certain extent by investing our own working capital. Okay. So that's the answer to your first question. Coming to your second question, I think let me say this way. I think for India as a country, right, where we are trying to build a very stable ecosystem for manufacturing services for the world, right, compared to some of the other countries like China and so on. One of the advantage that we have, which and I think David touched on this point, that hey, when I design a device, I want to see whether there is a backdoor entry or there is a possibility of an hack, or is the security really taken into account during the design of the firmware or of the hardware itself, right? So one of the things that we try to bring to the customer is not just look at the product from a perspective of the lead time and price, okay, but look at the entire value that a player like us can bring to them, right? It is from the perspective of whether we are able to support a well-designed firmware or a well-designed architecture on the device, or whether we are able to be transparent and give you the options and all the risks right upfront. And the risks are many, right? Nowadays, there is geopolitical risk, like we all know about what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. There are other risks in terms of the OEMs increasing their price. Even after putting a purchase order, there are certain OEMs that have increased their cost by 10%. So is the customer really educated enough during the purchase order time frame that these are the possible risks that will arise in your delivering your order, and are you ready to accept them upfront? I think that is the critical piece for IoT industry, I would say, because I don't think you should pick up the purchase order by promising everything can be delivered upfront. If the customer is well made aware, and that is what we are doing at Napino, that we are very transparent and honest that these are the possible risks that can come up in the next 12 to 18 months of delivering your units back to you. And if you're ready to accept and be open with us, right, to work with us together, that is good. And that is where what we have done, to summarize at the last statement, is we have come out with different business models to work with our customer. Because there are certain things which are laws of physics, right? You and I can't control. None of us can control. If the lead time of a chip is 52 weeks, it is 52 weeks. We might not be able to push it beyond certain few weeks here and there, up or down. What we can do is work with the customer as a partner more than as a vendor or as a supplier, and work on a model which is kind of call it cost plus margin at times, where we open up our cost transparently to them and our margins, and probably work hand in glove with them to ensure that they know that at the end of the day, if I have to deliver something to my customer, even they would understand what are the risks and challenges that are there in the ecosystem right now. And to summarize, I think it is going to stay for 2 years. I think John mentioned this, 2 to 3 years. at least to a minimum, what we are seeing today. Fortunately, outside the US, we are also seeing the chip fabrication ecosystem is just getting started in India, and I have my fingers crossed. I hope that in next 3 to 5 years, we should have at least one or two player who can offer this locally and help companies like me to service customers like Matt in a more efficient way, if possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinay. Lastly, I would like to ask a visionary question to each of the panelists. I request that the answers be brief because we want to leave some time for question and answers at the end. So my first question is to Matt. You have a crystal ball engineered by David and built by John. When you looked into the crystal ball, what did you see in connected medical devices 5 years from now?
So a crystal ball, huh?
It's a crystal ball.
So in terms of prognosticating, I think, in the world of medical device, 5 years, honestly, it's just a blip when we think about the regulatory hurdles, the design, the development challenges, and everything we're getting. So, but I think what I really see is a continued growth and expansion in particularly with DME, so durable medical equipment in RPM and RTM. And I think it was McKinsey and Company who said that they're projecting a global market of those types of devices of around $250 billion by 2027. So, 5 years from now. And I've seen also forecasts of 18 to 25% annual growth rate up till 2030 in that particular area. So as you're thinking about where you're positioning your resources, understand that this dramatic shift from out of the hospital to the home is certainly taking place, and you need to be playing in that. For 100 years, our healthcare industry was built around delivering care within those four walls of that hospital, and that shift has been dramatic. And I think there's a rapid pace around there. In addition to that, I think there is a move to make devices more as a service. So we all know about software as a service, or SaaS. I think what we're starting to see is more devices as a service. And now that the IoT has helped to push this, I think we're going to see more companies wanting to do this. So I think the comment earlier was around, hey, look, we've shifted from a razor and razor blade model. And I think this is a way a lot of device companies are starting to get that back, in the sense of they want to have subscription models with their devices. And so the devices that are out there need to have more service wrapped around them. You're dealing with patients who are primarily going to be the ones who apply and use the device in the home. And so by doing so, they need to have a level of support that hasn't necessarily had to be there. So as you're thinking about in the future about how you want to position yourself, bundling up services that support a population that isn't as sophisticated as typical techs, providers, and doctors will need to be done. And so having that service layer wrapped around it, making it more of a subscription model, I think we're going to see more of it. I'm just not sure it's going to be adopted. I think there will be some pushback on that. Certainly device companies like it because, once again, it's a steady stream. However, I don't know necessarily if it boosts the price significantly, if we're going to see a lot of that. Two other quick things as well. I think devices, and we need to, as we think about devices moving forward on this, they need to be simpler and easier to use, simply because it's patients, once again, who are using this. You got to be able to plug it in and leave it, so that that 70-year-old who isn't very tech savvy can go ahead and use the device in their home. And of course, everyone always pushes on cost. Cost is going to have to be there. If it's in a subscription type model, you can spread that cost out. But once again, if we're going to distribute this to the millions of people who could use it, especially here in the U.S., you're going to be looking at a lower cost, but certainly higher volume. So those are those, Nasser, I think, are what I'm seeing in my crystal ball.
Thank you, Matt. David, Matt's crystal ball requires a software enhancement. You implemented an amazing upgrade and took a peek. What did you see happening in connected medical devices over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, thanks, Nasser. So I agree with Matt. I think the subscription is kind of the consumable piece of that. And as people are mining data. They're looking for that subscription type data to be able to offer not only the patients, but to other portions of the market for revenue streams as well. I think what I'm seeing in it, it's kind of the smart wearable is obviously getting smaller and smaller as we build a device that attaches to the arm or is even consumed or implanted. What happens though is as we're connected, it takes a lot of power, right? To be able to stay connected, it takes a lot of power to transfer massive amounts of data. What I see is the pendulum kind of shifting back a little bit, where now because things are getting smaller, batteries, you need to last longer. I mean, with hearing aids, people don't like to change out batteries. Nobody likes to charge their iPhone, for that matter, multiple times a day. People want to set it and forget it. And so what I believe in looking at the crystal ball, it's as we get smaller and smaller, a lot of the data is going to be processed internally, so you don't necessarily have to transmit and communicate all the data. There's a lot of advances in AI that is happening right now, where we can crunch some of the analysis. The machine learning is getting embedded now, so you don't necessarily have to send the data up to a server to crunch the data. And so I think there's going to be a lot of getting back to the device itself doing a lot of the operations. And again, in smart wearables, it's combining the razor and the razor blade into one kind of piece. Mind you that it's still looking for the subscription model portion of it and the data mining. But I really see that technology making leaps and bounds, especially right now, with integrating not only on medical, but I mean, medical tends to be somewhat of a lagger on technology, but into other industries and being able to apply it into medical. So I think that's where my crystal ball sees it.
Thank you, David. John, you build products for customers in the medical industry to get involved in early stage of product manufacturing. When you implemented David's updates to the crystal ball, you ran a quality check. You realized that he did an awesome job, and the enhancements were even better than previously anticipated. What do you see in connected medical devices 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, and I know David well, so I know he did an awesome job. Yeah, so you know, as far as the supply chain side of this, to be able to keep up with demand, Vinay and I both spoke about how integrated circuit manufacturing and fabs are becoming more localized. We're trying to build more fabs in the US. They're trying to build more in India. They'll come on stream and they will provide some localized supply. We're going to be in this kind of retrenching of the supply chain that we both spoke about. But in normal market conditions, JIT supply chains work well. They're efficient. They wring out cost. And we've all got short memories, you know, as human beings. But I think the pandemic is leaving a mark on all of us that will kind of shift our short memories a bit. Will we get back to global JIT supply chains? Yeah, I think we will, but I think it's going to be kind of a dual nature of supply chain. I think due to the disruptions we've all lived through and the pain we've been through, I think there's going to be a localized content and a globalized JIT content that supply chain designs are going to have to take on in order to ensure supply for the long term. And on the product design side, we see many bills of materials or BOMs that have sole source components on the BOMs. I think from a product design perspective, we have to get into designs that allocate alternates and designs that enable you to make switching of components easier. Switching ICs is very, very difficult. but we're highly leveraged on supply of ICs. So can product designs morph over time to be more forgiving, to align with supply chain? I think many product designers have felt burned in the last couple of years by speccing a component that then nobody can get. So I think the product design cycle is going to take some of that into account.
Thank you, John. Vinay, this question is a little bit more specific on Napino. India and China are global exporters of medical devices. Many manufacturers in China want to build Matt's products. Chinese manufacturers have an advantage because they can acquire raw material locally and at lower costs. How are you going to convince Matt, David, and John that Napino is their best manufacturing partner?
Thanks, Nasser. I think Matt is really in demand today. Like everybody is behind Matt, all of us here. So
He's the boss.
I think the customer is the king, right? So I think let me first answer the question. So yeah, more than Napino, I think as India, right, as the manufacturing ecosystem. So there are 5 areas where I think India is able to compete very well and will keep on improving. Okay. The first area I feel where we are rapidly picking up pace is automation of our manufacturing industry. I think that is happening like really rapidly. Like if some of you go to the virtual tour of my facility, you will see we are now using cobots for manufacturing quality check processes, which is called as FCT, okay, or ICT. We basically use now I think very advanced tools and SMT lines, which are equally competitive and comparable to the best that you can see in other countries. And there is a rapid move towards by Napino, and I feel by many other electronic companies, manufacturing company, to adopt processes like paperless factory. And that is one thing I learned when I visited my dear friend John, and I loved it what they do in their setup. And I think we are trying to replicate something like that here. So one is automation, which will definitely bring down the cost for the customer. It will reduce the time that it takes to do certain activities like quality controls or inventory tracking and so on. So that is first. Second, the cost itself. Like there are 2 costs in any manufacturing services: the cost of raw material and the cost of process, which includes the labor cost, the electricity charges, the overheads, and other things. You're right. I think today the cost of raw material, China definitely has an advantage because there is a lot of local fab, there are a lot of local supply chain, and the ecosystem is set up. Where I think India is now doing better is in the cost of labor and the cost of overheads. We are now actually more economical when it comes to the process cost of delivering a particular manufacturing service, right? And that's a study by various research bodies which can be looked up online. So I think if you combine the two and the value addition that I covered earlier, right? As I told you, right, making a hardware is really hard. It is not easy. It is not just you get a raw material, put it together, and you're done. It is all about designing, BFM, BOM optimization, cost value addition, testing, validation, and various other things around how do you actually do the firmware development and other aspects when you're delivering the design in addition to the manufacturing service as well to the customer. I feel India has a much better advantage there now. And I think in the next 2 years, Nasser, the amount of investment the Indian corporates, companies like Napino, and as well as with the support of government incentives are doing in building this ecosystem, it is immense actually. I'd always say this, that India did superbly well in IT and ITES over the last 20 years. It is going to do amazingly well in the next 20 years in manufacturing. I think it is a lot of focus that we have, not just for supporting customers from the West, US or Europe market, but there is a huge demand from Indian consumer itself. India is growing in terms of the pickup of latest technology. So the government has realized that we cannot keep relying on external parties to supply our hardware or devices or electronics, for that example. Third is English speaking. I think that is a very good advantage. And I think we say this very transparently to our customers that if you need something to be discussed in 30 minutes, we have seen that if you go to non-English speaking countries like China, it can take 1 hour to discuss something that should need 25 minutes. I think with India has that very strong advantage of ability to understand and to converse in one of the widely used language like English, right? The fourth one is transparency and trust. I think this is one that Napino lives and breathes. Is that, as I said, we are very transparent and honest. I will never copy a design. I have no intent to reverse engineer a product and sell it locally of any of my customers, or compete with them by manufacturing or selling something that that my customers are offering me. So I think transparency and trust, and I think the last part is about I kind of covered it, but I want to restress that is the government support for the manufacturing ecosystem is now immense in India. One of the biggest scheme is production linked incentive, PLI, which is out there for multiple segments like drones, satellite, IoT, consumer electronics, and so on. And I think bundled with what we do and what government is supporting us, I think we are ready. India is ready, and I honestly think when it comes to large mass scale manufacturing, where you need to do it at a lower cost and achieve the advantage of economies of scale, we are well positioned in that. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vinay. I think they are getting convinced that they want to work with you. This marks the end of my questions. At this stage, I will request Mr. John Siennameyer to maybe host a couple of questions from the audience because we are out of time, and we'll make it quick. John?
Sure. Thank you. And this is a question to Vinay to start, but not every company is a big company can afford the increasing costs that John Sage mentioned with the components and such. But what kind of creative solutions are you seeing in the market that you may be offering to clients in terms of partnerships, ownership, sharing risk, or whatever to make it work for companies?
John, did you say the question is for me or for generally for everyone?
Yes, if you would start the answer, please.
Yes,
okay.
it is.
I think we covered this during the panel discussion at length and breadth. I think between me and John Sage, I think we have covered most of the risks that are there in terms of if the question is around the supply chain and the raw material. So maybe we don't need to go over that again. But in summary, I think as I covered that we are trying to look at all the risks that comes into play and work very, very hand in glove with the customer to ensure that they will still achieve what they want to achieve in terms of selling their services or solution. And I think just to add one point, in addition to the hardware device, the important point is how does that communicate back to the cloud when the data starts moving from the device to the network, right? So one of the things that we are also doing is offering a bundle of services to the customer. It's not just that we will do the EMS and we are done with it. I think getting the data from the device over the internet through some protocols like MQTT or other into a cloud where it can become meaningful for the end usage is very important. And I think we are going to that level as well to offer to the customer. I think that's the additional point I want to touch upon.
Okay, thank you. John, one more question.
Sure. How are medical device companies looking at the Asia Pacific region for expansion? And does working with a company such as Napino in India help in that regard?
Who is this to?
Maybe to John Sage and then to Vinay and whoever else.
Yeah. So John, that's a great question. Our business here at Vergent is really focused on the US market. So I don't know that I'm the best person to try to field the Asia question. I might ask Vinay to step in on that one.
Okay, Vinay. Vinay.
Did we lose Vinay?
It seems like it. All right. Well, I would like to thank our panelists and our audience for participating. If you want more information on Napino, please visit our website, www.napinotech.com, or email us on info@napinotech.com. A link to this webinar will be made available in around 10 days on Napino's YouTube and LinkedIn channels. If you would like to be notified of future such events, please subscribe to those channels. We plan to hold similar events regularly, and we welcome any suggestions on topics of interest from the audience. Also, if any of you are interested in participating as a panelist, please reach out to us. Thank you again, and I wish everyone a wonderful day.